There we go. It just clicked on.
No, it was on.
Was it on? But that'll help us tremendously if we don't have phones ringing. Starting off our agenda tonight, we have our invocation. Tonight, Council Member Bert Buys will do the invocation for us. Then we'll have the pledges to the American and Texas flag. So if you would please stand for the invocation and pledges.
Let us give thanks for all the blessings, opportunities, and challenges you have given us. Guide us with your strength and wisdom so we can make the right decisions for all the citizens of Helotes. With the 50-year anniversary of our Carnival Parade happening on this Saturday, let us pray for a safe event with good weather. Also, our Helotes Area Community Band Director Emeritus, Charles Kuntz, fell and broke his hip yesterday. May we pray for his full and complete recovery. For those that are not able to be with their family and loved ones because of military service, we pray for your quick and safe return. May we give our best always and be assured of your presence with us. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. Okay, next up is our open session. Citizens to be heard. Grace, did we have anyone sign up? No one signed up to speak to council during citizens to be heard, so we will go over that item or pass it by. That brings us to our consent agenda. Tonight we have items 3 through 5. And a consent agenda, if you're not familiar with the procedure in a meeting such as this, we tend to lump multiple items together if the staff and I consider them to be fairly routine, and they can all be handled with one motion and 1 second and recommended for approval. However, if a council member would like to ask a question that can be handled fairly briefly, they can go ahead and ask a question on any of the items, or if they would like to discuss an item in more detail, they can ask to have an item actually pulled, and we'll pull it from the consent agenda and move it down into the items for individual consideration. So at this time, I'll ask the council, are there any questions on items 3 through 5 or any requests to pull an item?
I have a question, sir.
Okay.
On agenda item 5, is this just for the curb cuts that we're approving? Because I thought we already approved budget money for this project.
We did add to this if you want, but Bexar County wanted to change the language on the agreement that we already signed. They have a new regulation concerning labor rates, and so they tweaked that and they sent it back to us, and they'd like for us to just, as a formality, sign it again.
Okay, or did they increase the cost of the project?
No.
Okay. I had another question, and I think I asked Rick this before. When do you think it might get started? The actual project, put some concrete on the ground?
Whenever all this gets approved and we can work it
So we
into
don't
the
have a
schedule.
date yet?
Not a firm date.
I would
no.
suggest you do it during the summertime when school's out, because
Yeah.
that traffic
It'll
is
be at
terrible.
least that, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we're doing the design documents currently in-house, and so we will, once this is signed, we can theoretically start immediately, but we had to have some construction documents
Okay.
prepared.
That's all I had.
Anything else? Any other questions? Any requests to pull? Then I would ask for a motion to approve consent agenda items 3 through 5, and then a second, please.
Mr. Mayor,
Move that we approve consent agenda items 3 through 5 as written.
We have a motion from Fredericks. Do we have a second?
I'll second. Sorry.
I'm going to give it to Ed.
Yeah,
okay?
give it to Ed.
We have a second from Villanueva. So a motion from Fredericks, a second from Villanueva to approve consent agenda items 3 through 5. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Consent agenda items 3 through 5 are approved. And Next up, we have our audit report. However, our representative from the auditors is not here yet, so we'll skip over that. And if there's no objections, we'll skip over it. That is technically a suspension of the rules, but since she's not here, we'll just do it that way if that's appropriate with you guys. And go to number 7, which is just discussion, and if you choose to take action on this, it's written that way. And this is an extension of the existing lease agreement by the existing leasees for more years added to the lease agreement. So if I can have a motion and a second to discuss and take action.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion, we discuss and take action on agenda item 7.
We have a motion from Buys. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Fredericks. Did y'all have a chance to look over this? You want Rick to run through it real quick, basically, with why we were approached? Rick, you want to just give him
Sure.
a minute or two rundown?
Crown Castle submitted the document that was included in your packet. They're calling it a letter agreement. Essentially, what this document would do would authorize the extension of 9 renewal terms of 5 years each, and would be for a lump sum amount of $4,000. The agreement would also be amended, the original agreement would also be amended to essentially have a right of refusal clause in it, so that if we were approached by any other competitors of Crown Castle or any other wireless carriers, that they could we would be required to negotiate with them first, and if they said they weren't interested, then we could then proceed to negotiate with the other companies that are approaching us. My personal opinion is that that the city should reject this offer and perhaps counter or authorize somebody to negotiate on council's behalf, because the $4,000 over 30 to 45 years is insignificant of an increase. Or you can just reject the whole idea in itself of adding additional extensions, because there are currently 3 remaining 5-year extensions on that tower. But we felt like we needed to present it to council because we were presented with it ourselves. So that's why it's on tonight's agenda. And they're requesting that we make a decision by April 30th, which of course is 2 days from now.
And just, the original agreement is in your packet, and as Rick said, neither he or I would recommend extending it for an additional 30 years. As we said, they already have 3 5-year extensions that they haven't used yet, so they're good for 15 years. However, if you guys would determine that you'd entertain this, I would recommend more than $4,000 up front. And also, if you look at on page, there's no page number, but Article 5, actually 501B of the existing agreement, just for your information, each year the rental fee goes up 3% according to this existing agreement. And so if an extension was made, I would recommend requiring more money up front, and then perhaps increasing that annual inflation factor, for lack of a better term, to at least 5% and preferably 10%. Because if you look at the schedule of payments, a few pages behind that, the 3% only takes it up a few $100s a year. And so if we're going to extend it for that length of time, there should be more compensation in the way of annual payments and upfront payments. That's just my input. So, Bert, it's your motion, so if you would like to add anything to what Rick and I have said.
You pretty much took the words right out of my mouth. The only thing I'd like to also say is that is handcuffing other councils with another 30 years of this contract at only $4,000 is something I don't want to do. So, and plus with everything else that you said, I agree with. So that's all I had on that.
Okay, Paul?
What happens to the property after the 15 years after the extension?
I read it in there, it just reverts back,
Do we take possession of the property?
I
Yes,
believe
they
that's the way
have,
it's
they
written,
have,
yeah.
the property reverts back to us, or the easement essentially is removed, and they have to remove the tower and all of the components.
Right.
And restore it back to its original condition.
Are we free to negotiate with another company at that point in time, or that's their property and they can take it down?
No, it is not their property, it is their easement, and we would be at liberty to negotiate with anybody we'd want to at that time. Now, the original contract says that they have to remove it and restore it back to its original condition, but that's an additional cost to them. So I can't imagine if the city said, we want to keep this up, but we want you to go away. I can't imagine them saying, no, we're going to take it down, but they certainly have that right, I believe. Because it's an additional cost for them to have to demo everything and remove it.
Yeah, the original agreement was for a 10-year initial period with 3 5-year extensions, and they're just coming to the end of the, at the end of the 10-year period, because this was in '05, so I guess they're into the first extension or close to it, depending on the date. I don't remember the date. And so they're good for 15 years. And if you recall, several months ago, we brought a proposal to you, which you rejected, to have a cash payment to us. So what they're requesting also, as Rick said, is a right of first refusal, to where if we ever get an offer like that, we can let them know and they can at least match it or beat it. So that's one thing they're asking for. That's not in the existing agreement. Anything else?
No, sir.
Cynthia?
No, I'm definitely not for this. I just can't imagine hampering the city to 2065. It doesn't even make any sense. I mean, this is just not a good idea, especially considering they still have 15 years to go, and there's still time for them in those last few years to start this thing over again. But no, I'm definitely not for this at all.
Okay, Ed?
Yeah, I suggest we deny this, or not enter into this contract and just renegotiate it. As you said, we got to account for inflation. They've come back already to modify the terms and now want right of first refusal. Tells me they really, really want it. So I think we counter, we're in a better position there. But right now, it's just a one-sided deal. It's not in our favor.
Would you want to discuss a counter that we could send back to them, or you guys can decide just to flatly deny it with no counteroffer?
I like the terms that you cited just a minute ago, Mayor, as a
Okay.
counter to start.
Okay.
But definitely, if not that, then we deny this agreement as it's on its
Okay.
face.
Alex?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I concur with the rest of council and all involved, and I think that, if I'm not mistaken, Rick or Mayor, they're not required to renew the lease. It's their option whether they want to renew it. So in my opinion, 10, 12 years from now, if technology is so drastically different than today, where they don't need towers like this anymore, maybe everything's satellite driven, or maybe there's some other technology that's replaced it, they're not going to renew the lease anyway, in which case that's not a problem. If technology at that point says that piece is still very valuable to them as an entity, then they're going to be willing to pay a whole lot more than what the renewal of this or the engagement of this, even with a 5 or 10%, is. And I think that it would be very short-sighted of us to enter in some agreement that locks us into a fixed amount that they don't have to choose anyway if it's not to their advantage. Everything about this points to their win and no benefit to the city. I can't support it, even with negotiated terms.
Yeah, Rick and I talked about that technology also. We may be all satellite and all built-in cell phones or something in 15 years. Any follow-up, Bert?
No, sir.
Paul? Cindy? No? Okay, well then we'll call the question. In the meantime, I'm going to explain it. Could you try and get Kim and see if she's on the way?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor, before we go to a vote, the motion was to discuss and take action, so.
Yes, I'm going to explain
Okay. We'll make sure we're voting on the
what we
right
can
thing.
do,
to-
correct. The action is, the way it's written, to essentially approve it. So if you vote yes on this, it would be essentially to approve this. So to deny it, just simply vote no. And that means if you deny it, we're not even going to go ahead and try and change the terms, because it sounds like nobody's interested, and I'm certainly not interested in giving them 30 years. So a yes vote would approve, a no vote would deny. Okay, so calling the question, all in favor of item 7, say aye. All opposed, say no.
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 The item number 7 is denied, and we will notify Crown Castle as to that decision. Grace, would you let Rick know that she just walked in? We were just trying to get you. That's okay, no problem. You won't even be able to take a breath because you're up. But just relax for a second, and we'll get Rick and Grace back in here.
Special meeting last week through me.
Do what?
I thought Bandera Road wouldn't be so bad tonight.
Oh, are you kidding?
it's Carnival.
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 Very true.
While we're waiting for them, I would like to introduce Jason Vandergriff. He's from Troop 484 that meets in the Lions Club. Jason, stand up if you would. And he's here working on his citizenship merit badge, so congratulations. And I didn't get to visit with any of you other guys, so we'll pass you by, and next time you just need to get here a little early and we'll introduce you also. Okay, Kim, you're up, and we're going to have a report on our audit from last year. And Kim, if you would, introduce yourself and tell everybody who you're with, and be sure that you're speaking into the mic, and we appreciate you being here.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. My name is Kim Roach. I'm with Armstrong Bond and Associates, and it's wonderful to be back with you again this evening. Again, I apologize for my delay. Our firm did do the audit, of course, for the year ended September 30th, 2015, and so I'm here just to kind of go over some of the highlights for you and answer any questions that you might have had. I do have to say, first and foremost, it's a wonderful opportunity to get to work with the city. The staff is absolutely fantastic to work with, as well as just make sure that they keep us on our toes, but they make our lives as easy as possible, so it's always wonderful to come here. If you'll turn in your reports to pages 11 and 12. There were quite a few new things that happened this year, in particular for your city, but across the industry. And so I wanted to call your attention to a couple of those items. These statements in particular, as you may recall from previous years, these are considered your full accrual statements. So they include all of your long-term assets as well as all your long-term liabilities. So in particular for the city of Helotes this year, this is going to include the new bonds, the new certificates that were just issued for the Series 2015. Even though you won't see those in full on your month-to-month or annual internal statements, they do show here because they include all your assets and all your liabilities. So if you look over on page 11, you'll notice that you actually see 3 columns there: the governmental activities, the business type activities, and then the total. You may notice as we go throughout this, of course, the business type activities are going to now be 0. This was for the EMS and the dispatch departments that were previously recorded as a separate type of activity, as a business type. But during this fiscal year, and really effective October 1 of this fiscal year, were really moved over to the general fund, as so much of the funding really had to come from the general fund. And so now they're treated more like just departments of that fund rather than separate funds. So that's why you'll see the business type is now 0 all the way through. So for your governmental activities at September 30, you had total assets of just under $18 million. The majority of this, of course, was made up of your fixed assets, and you can see that breakdown there. But you did have cash and investments of just over $6.3 million. If you turn over to page 12, This begins your liabilities. You'll notice under liabilities, you've got some of the items that you will typically see, including your accounts payable. You also have under your non-current liabilities, this is going to include all of those long-term liabilities, as I mentioned, related to your previous bonds and the certificates that were just issued. Those items are broken down in due in 1 year and due in more than 1 year. So you can see the current portion there. You'll also see a new line there. The certificates that were issued this year came at a premium, and so the unamortized premium of that is shown as a separate line. Below that is one of the other new items that we've been telling you about for the last couple of years that's been coming but has not been shown up before. The net pension liability, of course, you've always had a pension and you've always had an unfunded liability. It's just that previously this had never been recorded on your financial statements, and now you can see here that it has been. So that's that $297,000. I did look, and you're actually 93% funded. Compared to previous years, they actually thought you were only about 89% funded. So they did a lot of changes at TMRS, and of course through their actuaries, and they, constantly evaluate and review that. And so actually, after all of the numbers were done for this last year, they actually showed you to be a little bit more funded than what the previous year was. So even though you had to book this liability on these financials, you're actually still in a very good, healthy position. This is the liability that a lot of people were concerned would throw them into some sort of a deficit. And so really for you all, this, $300,000 was not a large hit to your overall net position. It's also, of course, not booked on your internal statements. It's only shown here, as it is considered a long-term liability. Below that, you'll notice a contingent liability. This was also new for the city this year. This was related to the litigation and the judgments that were issued for the developers. It's called a contingent liability, as of course the city is appealing those judgments, but in the event that the city does end up having to pay, this is the amount that so far has been awarded through attorney damages and litigation costs. So after all that, you'll notice down in your net position, the majority of your net position, of course, is built up and made up of your fixed assets.
I want to clarify something.
Oh, please.
On the contingent liability that you said that has been awarded, that hasn't been awarded, that is the dollar value of everything that we could potentially pay.
That
But-
is true, but the way that the attorney letter read is that the initial had been awarded to the developer, and it's just that it's being appealed, is my understanding, right?
You are both correct, but you are both incorrect at the same time. There is about $240,000 has been actually awarded.
Okay.
That is accruing interest. The other ones have not come to final judgment yet, but this would be the liability if we were to lose.
Gotcha.
So,
And
I mean,
this-
you're correct. It needs to be on there that way, but
And that initial amount is accruing at 5%,
That's right.
and I believe that's simple interest.
I believe so, yes. And of course, this is put on here as kind of a conservative worst-case scenario. So of course, in the event that the city was awarded in the city's favor, then that would not have to be due in full. So therefore, because of some of these new liabilities, and again, these are only booked on the full accrual statements, then it does show the part of your net position that is unrestricted as being a deficit. But of course, that's, again, kind of a conservative basis and sort of a worst-case scenario situation, just to be in compliance with the generally accepted accounting principles. And that's not to say that that's actually what's going to turn out to be. Any questions on any of that? Yes, sir.
It's exciting.
It is exciting.
I just had a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Ken, when you said that our net pension liability, we're 90% funded, when do we need to start worrying about it? What's the number that you start worrying about it being at,
And it was 93.
Yes, sir,
I
93.
thought you said 90, it's 93?
93 funded, which is good.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. To be truthful with you, TMRS is always been very proactive, and so therefore most of the Texas cities are pretty nicely funded, especially compared nationwide. I couldn't give you an exact percentage to be concerned about, but I think that comes more from TMRS and them developing their contribution rate to give to the city.
Okay.
So, I've seen some cities that, even here in Texas, that have gotten as low as down in like 80%. And even that, I would say, considering nationwide and considering the timing of when this, this is talking about over the course of all the employees' future retirement payouts. So, you know, I mean, it's not that this is due tomorrow by any means. And so that's why I think even an 80% funding isn't anything to be totally concerned about. It's still pretty high.
And as I recall in our discussion, I guess last month, the 93% funded compared to other cities similar to our size is very good.
Yes. In fact, it was actually the highest of all the cities that our firm does that I kind of looked around to
Right.
compared to.
Okay, thanks.
You bet. Well, if there's no other questions on, oh, yes, sir.
I'm sorry, I have one.
Okay.
If we fast forward to September, or the close of the fiscal year of 16, our contingent liabilities are going to more than double. Okay? So at what point do you think that our bond rating might be affected?
And that's actually a very good question. I don't know how the bond rating is impacted when you have a contingent liability. I do know as far as the net pension liability, or I guess I don't know for certain, but I feel like that a lot of the bond councils will recognize that net pension liability as not being an immediate liability due to you. It is being paid through your monthly contributions that TMRS sets the rate for. I know for certain for school districts, they have said, the Texas Education Agency has said they do not account for that liability as part of their bond rating. So because of that thinking, I would think that bond councils for a city would treat the same for the net pension liability and therefore possibly the contingent liability as well, because it's not a definite payable to you. It's just sort of a potential.
Yeah, okay.
And the contingent liability is just the lawsuits, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, correct me if I'm wrong, but they won't be doubling because we're no longer collecting permit fees. And most of this is permit fees that were paid under protest that could be awarded back to the builders. The only ones that are for sure awarded were in our first case, and that's that $240,000 that's accruing at 5%. So the fact that we're not collecting permit fees anymore, the number's going to stay static except for that 5% accrual on the first 240.
Okay. So
That-
we're saying we only have one summary judgment that we're appealing at this time? I thought we had multiple.
No, we have more. It's just they haven't definitely been decided that we owe that money back. I'm right on that, right?
Yes, sir. There hasn't been an award of dollars
Right.
other than the Continental, that I'm aware of, other than the Continental Homes case.
That's the original 240 plus the 5%. All the others are kind of static, and it's been, the oral arguments were given on the 20th to the Fourth Court of Appeals, so it's kind of static right now. But there's no way it's going to double
It's not going to double.
or even really go up appreciably, other than maybe some attorney's fees and, that 5%.
Right, the accrual, okay.
Yeah,
All right, thank you.
Well, at this time, I wanted to turn your attention to more of the internal statements that you usually look at, which are on the modified accruals. So if you'll turn to pages 15 and 16.
You
It's
said
all-
15 and 16?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
This also takes those governmental activities and it splits it up a little bit more into seeing the individual funds. So of course you see your first column there for your general fund. The second column is the economic development fund. Third is debt service. The fourth is your capital projects, which is going to include that new certificates that were issued this year. And then the last column there, or the last before the total, is your non-major funds. And that's some of your special revenues, including your court technology, your court security, the PEG funds, and some other items such as that are now being tracked as a separate special revenue fund. The detail behind that is also included later in the report, but just because of their dollars are so small, they're just combined in total here. So looking down your general fund, you can see there that you had total assets of just over $2 million. Of course, the majority of that is made up of your cash and investments of $1.1 million. You had additional certificates of deposit of almost another $250,000. And then the rest is pretty much just receivables, including some monies that are due to the general fund from some of the other funds within the city, primarily the EDC and the debt service. After all your liabilities and another item called deferred inflows, you can see that you had a total fund balance just for the general fund of $1.6 million. This represents about 3.6 months of your operating expenditures. And I know that that's something we've kind of looked at and talked about in the past, again, of course, because now this year represents a full year of the EMS and the dispatch being reported as fund, or as departments within the general fund. So I did kind of a quick calculation to say, had this not been the first year, how would this compare to previous year's general fund balance? And so last year, if all other things were comparable, last year's general fund balance would have been about 3.8. So you can see that it wasn't too much of a change from year to year, other than just the fact that those departments were brought under. Also, of course, you're still very much in a healthy position with GASB. They say 3 to 6 months. I know before you'd been showing about 10 months, so this is probably feels like a big drop, but again, it's because, you know, especially within management, they were fully aware that the reason why that 10 months looked so inflated was because of the way that the city was reporting those other departments. Any questions on any of that?
I got a question. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
What are we making on our CDs? What percent?
Between 0.3 and 0.5?
How much?
Between 0.3 and 0.5?
0.3 and 0.5. Then why are we paying hold on. Why are we paying 5% on our contingency liability? Who decides to give them 5%?
The court, the
Oh,
judge.
the court does
The
that?
judge.
5%?
It's punitive, it's kind of like a punishment, they increase the interest rate.
Oh, really? Okay. Sorry
We
about
were
that.
told that was pretty standard number that they
Yeah.
usually
Well, I wish
use.
I could get that. Anyway, excuse me.
Go, you're fine.
Sorry
Any other
about that.
questions on the balance sheet here?
No.
Well, then the last thing I wanted to turn your attention to is on pages 18 and 19. This is still looking at these same particular funds, but now looking at the revenues and expenditures. Again, to look at the general fund first, the total revenues were 5.5 million, almost 5.6 million. Compared to your final budget of 5.5 million, you actually had about a $9,000 positive variance there. The budget to actual is included later on. I just, rather than having you flip to that page, I just wrote down some key notes. You also had expenditures in the general fund of 5.5 million. Also compared to your final budget of 5.5 million, you actually came out with about a $12,000 positive variance there on your expenditures. Now, overall, just looking at revenues and expenditures, you would have had a positive change in your fund balance for the general fund of $24,000. But again, because those EMS and dispatch departments were truly brought into the general fund this year, that's what the large transfer out is considered. It actually is considered a transfer out, even though they were bringing those departments in, because those departments had been operating in such a deficit. So it was almost like for the general fund to absorb those, it had to absorb the deficit. So then therefore, that's what brings your general fund balance down to that 1.6 million that we were just looking at. The only other numbers on this page I really kind of wanted to focus on, again, with the new certificates that were issued this year.
I would like to, go ahead.
I just want to make sure that council understands, and I'm sure that y'all do, how that the net change in fund balance is working, and make sure that y'all don't have any questions on that. For years, we've been putting those in as proprietary funds, so these are business-type funds where expenditures were exceeding revenues, as they do in almost every department except for sometimes in court and sometimes in development services. So there was a huge liability there, a theoretic liability, if you will, because we were still paying those bills out of the general fund. But because they were in proprietary fund status, they had to show them as a deficit, okay? So if you recall, we incorporated those into the general fund this last year. So when you bring that over, you have to show that as a deficit. Now, some of that deficit isn't just operating revenues over expenditures. A significant amount, particularly for the dispatch center, if I'm correct, is the capital assets, because y'all were depreciating capital assets out of that, correct?
Yes, and I can actually give you that amount too, that was made up of just the capital assets. I believe it's
So
about
when we're talking about
300,000.
that, she can look, we're talking about all the computers, all of that kind of stuff that we bought with 2007 certificates of obligation, correct?
Yes, that's
Okay.
right.
So that number of the 2.2 million, or excuse me, 2.24 million is not just operating, but it's also all of the stuff that we put into buying EMS stuff and dispatch stuff. I'm trying to dumb this down just for everybody to understand clearly. So what is the number for the capital?
It was 329,000 because that was the net book value, so after the depreciation that's been taken to date.
Okay, but we've been depreciating that for several years now. So that's included in there. Now, what, on the EMS, do you have EMS capital in there?
That was both.
Oh, that was both, okay. So basically, we're taking what our general fund was, which every time we've come up and given y'all an audit presentation, the number of monthly expenditure, or excuse me, the average number of months that we have in our general fund that everybody likes to talk about was going up every year. And we would always say, or at least I would, that is a inflated number because you're assuming that the 2.243 million that somehow dispatch and EMS is going to be able to make that and give it back to the general fund, which, again, we're still trying with dispatch. We actually have a pretty good chance of getting another agency, but it's not working out that way. I think EMS is actually they bring in a significant amount of money. Do you have that ratio of how much money they brought in versus how much they expended?
Not calculated. I think I can find it for you, though.
But we're talking 60, 70% coverage probably?
Probably.
So EMS is actually doing relatively well, and the more agencies we bring on to dispatch are actually going to increase that as well, particularly if we get this other agency that we're trying to get. So
Did you say 70%?
I'd say 60, 70% probably. That's off the top of my head.
They're not bringing in that revenue. Are you talking about collection rate? That's up around 80 or 90.
The amount of revenue in EMS billing that we are getting offsetting the cost of running EMS.
Right.
Yeah, in 2014, the cost of running EMS, which included, of course, salaries and operating costs and everything, was $447,000. The revenue was about $130,000.
Okay, I figured it was around, that's way less than 50%.
No, but that also, you're deducting 130. We brought more in than revenue for 130,000 for EMS last year. We brought in over 200,000. So I think you're deducting some.
Well, I know we always made that adjustment to put on the receivable and then consider what part of the receivable would be collectible. So, I mean, that's just me just trying to look back through a historical
Yeah.
audit figure, but.
I realize I'm going on a tangent here. I'm just saying so I just want to make sure everybody understands that basically this is the net number that's owed back to the general fund from these proprietary funds. And so when you deduct it, you get the 1.6 or the 1.7. So, but really, from my perspective and from a financial accounting perspective, cash, we always go back and forth because I always look at cash. They always look at all these numbers that make sense to me but are somewhat convoluted. So the 1.5 to the 1.6 at September 30th of every fiscal year is typically about what we end up with at the end of every fiscal year in cash, which is, to me, is the most important. So the fact that this last fiscal year we brought in both EMS and dispatch still actually came in the black by what, 12,000?
Well, that was your expenditure black. And that's why I wanted to point out that just the revenues over the expenditures, that first number there, that 24,000, that's really more of what you would start seeing from year to year. Because, of course, that transfer is only a one-time bringing them into the general fund. So just all other things aside, had they always been there, the revenues did exceed the expenditures by about 24,000.
So $25,000. So we should expect to see that, assuming we still spend less than we bring in, by about 25,000. So we brought all of this in and we're still in the black, which I think is a success. And we haven't dropped, in my perspective, the general fund balance at September 30 of every fiscal year down below what it was prior to when we started it's gone down a little bit, but basically it's the same as prior when we started EMS and dispatch.
Right.
So I think it's a win. It looks bad on paper, but from my perspective, I'm looking at it and saying this looks actually pretty good, in my opinion. The only, again, concerning thing is I think what Councilman Villanueva brought up is the lawsuit stuff, how we're going to handle that. And of course, we've talked in closed session a variety of ways to handle that liability. So.
May I ask a question about?
Sure.
So basically, these numbers on the transfers out, that number, that won't be there next year for the next fiscal year, so things will look a little brighter on paper?
Correct, that's exactly right. That's a one-time kind of number to see.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think they look dim now.
No,
But
no, especially, yeah, to Rick's point, you know, that's the nice thing is that even with bringing all this in and getting a more clear picture or a more true picture of how the city has always operated the last several years, it's nice to know that it is still above that 3-month, you know, kind of threshold or recommended threshold.
Yeah, and just as a reminder to council and the folks in the audience and the thousands probably watching us on cable TV, who knows
About that.
how large of an audience we have. But when we started dispatch in October of 2010, and then our EMS in March of 2011, our goal was to not necessarily break even at any point in time, although we were hoping that could happen. But we were trying to provide those services and become self-sufficient and have us not expend any more than it would cost us to go out and contract with an outside entity. And I think so far we've been relatively successful with that. We gave ourselves about 5 years to hopefully stabilize. And when we did that, we started them, as Rick said, a proprietary business for each one. And it sounded like a good idea at the time, but realizing they're both city departments, like any other city department, it really wasn't fair to them because they were showing some red numbers each year. And that's why we decided to propose to council, and they accepted to bring them in like all the other city departments and make that changeover. So we kind of knew the numbers were going to work out the way they have. And so I'm very pleased myself with the way it's all worked out. And hopefully, as we go along in years, and like Rick says, we're might be adding another agency for dispatch. It's looking better all the time. And I would like to just reiterate something you said on the variables or the variances. What that tells me is that the council does a really good job in their budget process, because that's a very small variance from a $5.5 million budget to be off that small amount. Am I safe in saying that?
Yes, sir, I think so. I think from what I can see from audit procedures, there is a lot of work that goes into that budget. And yes, you know, you don't want to see large variances to the good or to the bad, because to see a large variance to the good may seem good, but it just means that you weren't having good figures to work with initially to plan with.
Right, and so I'm always very pleased and proud when we can stay within that small variance, because it does show that Rick's done his job by helping put the budget together, and council's done their job by working with us and approving some numbers that are very realistic.
Yes,
So I
sir.
just wanted to make sure that was clear to everyone.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, Bert has a question.
I don't think it's for you, Kim. Rick, I think it's for you. I'm a little confused. I always thought our collection, it's about EMS, our collection rate for EMS is like 80 or 90%.
It's
No.
two different things.
No.
That we were talking about the revenue coming in from insurance companies.
Okay.
That's the revenue.
What I was
side.
referring
what-
to, what I was referring to was the amount of collections we actually get from billing versus what we budgeted for.
Oh,
Versus, and you're talking about the amount that we bill, which we actually get back.
right. And so what's
That
the
is around
percentage?
50%, if I recall.
50%?
Yes.
Five
Is that-
zero? Okay. Are we at the point to where we might want to hire a collection agency and give them a percentage to go get this money for us?
We have a collection agency for that already.
Do? Yeah.
Yes, we have Business and Professional Services does the billing, and Lineberger, Gogan, Blair, and Sampson does the collections for us.
Are they doing a good job, in your opinion?
They're doing an excellent job on both warrant collections and property tax collections, and also on the billing collections, yes.
All right, that's all I have.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, take it away, Kim.
Sure. Well, the last thing I just kind of wanted to call your attention to, again, because of the certificates that were issued during the year, is if you look down the first column on page 19 there, you see that capital projects fund that I referred to. Of course, you see very little revenues, just that's the interest that was earned and some other miscellaneous revenue. But essentially, the expenditures were, of course, some of the expenditures that were already recognized for some of the engineering fees for the capital improvement and the projects that are happening within the city. But below that, that's where you can see those certificates being issued. Continuing on down that column, you can see, of course, that typically you had a pretty low fund balance in there just because this is kind of the start of some really big projects within the city. So now that ending fund balance is considered restricted because it primarily makes up the certificate money that came in. So since that's bond money, then of course that's restricted. Any other questions on anything? That was kind of a, I don't know, a lighthearted way to end it, I guess, but I'm happy to entertain any other questions.
I would like to point out in your letter that accompanied the audit that once again, we had no major or really no minor discrepancies or deficiencies that you guys found, and which gives us another clean audit.
Yes, sir, very much. We actually had no recommendations for improvement. We had no significant adjustments. Again, cannot reiterate enough what a pleasure it is for us to get to work with your city.
Great. Any other follow-up questions?
I have one question. How long have you been doing our audit? Do you remember?
No, sir, that's always the one question I think later I should have thought and looked up.
That's okay, no.
If I had to guess, I'd say somewhere around 2002, maybe.
Okay.
That's a
Are you
rough guess.
asking her personally or the company?
Company.
Company, okay.
I'm
Okay.
sorry,
She's just been doing
the
it a couple of
company.
years.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, yeah, no problem.
Before that, it was Debbie, but it goes back further than that, doesn't it? 2002?
I think it's the early 2000s.
Yeah. I thought it was longer than that.
Okay, how long have you been? Oh, I'm just kidding.
I think
Very
I've been
good.
doing it
It's
since
just- it's been a long time.
2009.
Okay, no further questions? Kim, as always, we appreciate it. Be careful out there. Okay, and that is going to conclude our agenda, another exciting agenda. So if there are no objections
Mayor,
from,
y'all will need to take action on that audit.
on the audit, accepting the audit. You got me. Okay, yeah, so we will need a motion and a second to accept the audit as it was presented.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we accept item number 6, the audit that was just presented to us.
We have a motion from Massey. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Second from Villanueva. So we have a motion and a second to approve the audit as it was presented to us tonight. So any discussion on that? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries. The audit is hereby approved. And again, if there are no objections to adjournment, we will adjourn this meeting, and we will